Well, hello and good afternoon. It is Saturday the 2nd of September 2017. Yes, we're finally in the month of September, or rather all too quickly into the month of September. This is my birthday month, so it's always a special time of year. It's also my mother's birthday, the day before mine, later this month. But I will podcast a couple of times before the great day dawns. Welcome if you are returning to spend some time with me. Welcome if this is your first time spending time with me, and I hope you enjoy yourself. If you are a returning viewer, or if you are a new viewer and you like what you see and what I have to say and to show you today, please remember to like this video and to subscribe. I generally record on a weekly basis, but sometimes it may be a little longer between videos, but by subscribing and turning on notifications, you'll be informed by YouTube when I've next uploaded a video. My name is Jared, or Peter, or Boniface. I am a former monk, a former bus driver. I live in Abingdon, in Oxfordshire, in the south of England, which is a small town on the River Thames, about 7 miles south of the city of Oxford. I'm originally from the northwest, from Salford, which is a city near Manchester, in Lancashire, or now Greater Manchester. And I am one of 7 children. I'm the middle child of 7 children. And the reason my channel and various social media names are hand-me-downs is partly because the skills that I am utilising as a crochet and knitter and sewer in particular have partly been handed down to me by my mother and my great aunt, her aunt, who, well, my great aunt was a tailoress, and my mother, I don't think I ever saw her as a child without, as when I was a child, that is. Obviously I never saw my mother as a child. That would be rather impossible. I don't think I ever saw her without a knitting needle or a crochet hook or a sewing machine making something. She's made things for all of us as children, usually for the babies or the very young children, but occasionally for the older children. And one of the things about being a middle child of a large family is that items that were bought for the older children, and they grew out of them before they were properly used up, as it were often handed down to the next generation, or the next child in line. I had an older brother. He was 5 or 6 years older than me, about 5.5 years older than me. So by the time I was wearing his hand-me-downs, they were hopelessly out of fashion. Collar shapes in particular at high school, I remember being a complete nightmare. And also trousers in the early to mid 70s in the UK, flares were the thing. By the late 70s, early 80s, when I was wearing the same clothes, drain pipes were the thing. So it was very much, everything I had was very much out of fashion. But I think previous generations, as I've mentioned many times, I think, on this podcast, previous generations had a sense of getting their money's worth out of things that they'd bought. My parents were not wealthy enough to be able to simply buy everything fresh. I mean, I will say one thing. I had a new pram bought for me. I was the 4th child, and so the first pram had seen better days by the time I came along, and I had a brand new Silver Cross pram bought for me. And Silver Cross prams are real, almost carriages on wheels, and indeed Silver Cross used the skill sets of carriage makers, were renowned for having high quality prams. So not everything I had as a child was a hand-me-down, but in fairness, probably most of the things I had were. I remember in particular we got new clothes at Easter, Christmas and Whitsun, and when we went on holiday. And the rest of the time we wore whatever clothes were in the house, and there were lots of clothes obviously, but very rarely new ones. But it was an abiding memory for a very long time that we had new clothes at specific times of year rather than just on a whim when we're out shopping, as seems to be so much the case now. And I think possibly we valued what we had more because we had less. It's a perverse notion, but the less you have, the more you value it. And everything we have now is so easily come by that we don't perceive the real value of the items that we possess. And I think for those of us who are creators, whether that's knitting, sewing, crocheting, weaving, whatever craft it happens to be, because we know the amount of time and effort that goes into creating something by hand, I think we value those things intrinsically, that we know that the person who has created the item has spent certainly several hours, if not several days of several hours, thinking about us as they're in the creative process and thinking about the thing that they're actually making. And not to suggest that we're always mindful at every second of every day of what we're doing, but that there is an intention underpinning what we're doing, which puts that person in the forefront of our mind. And I say this to everybody for whom I make items. It isn't the value of the item. It's probably cheaper to buy many of the items that we make in the shops, where they will have dubious origins and dubious employment practices and possibly the involvement of children and various other issues. But the point isn't the item, it's what the item represents. So in that sense, it's the non-intrinsic value of the item that gives it its value. So anyway, that was a rather long way round to getting on with the podcast. So that is my sense of what hand-me-downs represents. It represents the handing on of traditions of creating, either directly or indirectly through inspiration, if not by actual involvement, but also the sense that items should be valued and protected and preserved and handed on to somebody who's actually going to make use of them. So there we are. That's my kind of philosophy in a nutshell, in a way. So moving on then, my first two things are finished objects. I've had a week's annual leave this week, so I've actually got a couple of finished objects. And in fact, before I do move on, excuse me while I just lean across, it's just come to my attention that I actually have a finished object of my mother's. In 1976, my parents moved house into a newly built council estate, social housing project, I suppose, if you're not from the UK, in the centre of Salford, between the docks and the A6 of the Manchester Ship Canal and the A6 Broad Street. And they immediately set up a tenants association with a few other neighbours to organise fundraising for a street party for the Silver Jubilee 1977, which was then the 25-year anniversary of the Queen's accession to the throne in 1952, rather. And as part of the fundraising efforts, they organised a couple of Christmas parties, one for the children, one for the adults. And as part of the children's Christmas party, my mother undertook to make a stuffed toy for every child under the age of 3 on the estate within the residents association. So it's probably about 100 households at that time, because the estate was opened in phases. So we were the first phase to open, and then further down the road opened later, and across the main road opened later still. So that it was a gradual process of development, and it was a very nice council house. It was partly an experiment in sustainability, if you like, because we didn't have a boiler in the house. We had central heating, which was a first for us. Previously, we'd only had electric fires, and before that, coal fires. And there was a central boiler house, and that produced all the hot water and all the heating for the whole estate. And I recall it as a child. It was only ever on maybe once or twice a month. Because they were holding the water underground, and it was all pumped underground throughout the estate, there was very little heat loss due to change in atmospheric temperature, because earth temperature remains more or less constant. Wherever you are in the world, the temperature deep down in the earth is more or less constant in that area, and is not usually affected by the fluctuations in the air temperature above ground. So it was a very efficient system, and unfortunately hasn't been replicated elsewhere, which I think is a great shame. It's a really sustainable way of producing what we now consider to be basics of modern living, which is indoor hot water and heating systems. But that's an aside. So through various means, my parents and these other parents who were residents who were part of the committee for the Tenants Association, acquired various cuts of fur, faux fur, and my mother set out about making polar bears, brown bears and seals. And because she was working, I remember that summer into winter 1976, every day for 4 or 5 hours a day she was at that sewing machine, and it nearly crippled her hands by the end. She worked so hard to get them all done, and she really did, and they were fantastic items, really well made. But she decided to keep some of, as a kind of payment for her labour, she decided to keep some of the material for herself, and so she made each of her children either a bear or a seal. And she made herself a white baby seal using the polar bear fur, and my youngest brother got a polar bear, and I got a brown seal. And this is Sammy the Seal. Now Sammy the Seal is 41 years old, and he has sat on the end of my bed in every house that I've lived in since that day, and he's a bit dusty, probably could do with a bit of a wash, but apart from that he is in perfect condition, and he's such a beautiful item, with safety eyes affixed, and every bear and every seal had proper safety eyes fitted in, and there's a seam on each side of the body here and going all the way down, so it's cut in 3 parts, the right side, the left side and the front, and then each of the legs is sewn on as a separate, the front fins as it were, I think. Oh no, sorry, the front fins are partly the body and partly the side, so the upper side of the fin is the upper side of the body, and the lower part of the fin is so there are 2 fins there. So it's actually just sewn in 3 seams all the way around, which is incredible. The complexity of the work that she did, and it stands as a testament to her dedication and to her capabilities as a sewer. And I've always loved Sammy, and Sammy, as I say, sleeps on the end of my bed with me. But I just thought I think it was worth showing that my mother was really very capable as a crafter in her own right. So I will move on to my finished objects. I have 2. As I say, I was off work last week, back to work on Monday morning, partly because it was a long weekend. The weekend before, we have our late summer bank holiday on the last Monday of August. And so I only had to take 4 days leave to have a 5-day holiday. So I took some leave, and I had plans on what I was going to do. And of course, I didn't do any of the things I was going to do, but I did other things instead. So that's okay. And I meant to talk about this last week. I got this from Claudia, who is Crochet Luna on YouTube, from her wonderful podcast. And it is the Part Pixie Owl Glasses Case, which is a paid-for pattern on Etsy, I think, or Ravelry. No, on Etsy. I got this. I think you can get it through Ravelry. Yes, you can. You can get it through Ravelry or through Etsy, and it's Part Pixie is the designer name. And having moved to my new job, I've been given a Microsoft Office telephone, mobile phone, which doesn't come with any protective case at all. So I have a proper protective case for my own phone, which has a little wallet in it that has my most frequently used travel card and my debit card and that kind of thing. But this didn't come with a case. And I looked on Amazon and I thought, do I want to buy one? And I thought, no. And I saw this and I thought, although it's a glasses case, I can easily adapt it to be a phone case. And so I made Ollie the Owl. The colour choices were pretty much left down to the individual. The pattern was very easy to follow. It's showing slightly brighter colours on camera than it is in real life. The red in particular is not as violently red. Although it is a proper scarlet red, it's not as neon red as it's coming across. But it's got lovely different textures on the case. I didn't actually adapt the size of the case at all. This is exactly the size of the case that the pattern makes, and the phone fits in it like a hand in a glove, and it fits just below. But what I did do was I put a chain onto the back and a little button, which was one of my bunny rabbit buttons, the handmade, hand-painted little bunny rabbits. And so I've got a little loop over the back so that the phone doesn't fall out if it's tipped upside down. And I'm really very pleased with him. I think he's lovely. It's certainly, everybody at work has got the same phone. So I've already had 2 people try to pick up my phone instead of their own, thinking that if I'm in the office and I put my phone down on the desk and they put their phone down on the desk, it's very difficult sometimes to tell whose is whose. Nobody is going to mistake this phone for theirs. So I'm very pleased with Ollie. I think he's a striking addition to my wardrobe, as it were, and will be very much enjoyed as he sits on my desk while I'm at work. So that's my first finished object. My second finished object is actually something I designed for myself. So I will be, I've written up the pattern. I'll be writing it up again because I've written it up in UK crochet terms, and I'll also want to write it into US crochet terms, and then I will put the pattern on Ravelry. I looked on Ravelry for a pattern for this and there wasn't one. And how this came about is one of the YouTubers I follow is called Niall Wilson, and he's a gymnast with the Great British Gymnastics team that won a bronze all-around medal at the last Olympics in Rio. And he has a YouTube channel which is, he's from Yorkshire, he's a very down-to-earth kind of person. He has some really fun videos to watch, and it's just enjoyable. It's a nice 5 minutes to watch. His father is, in particular, is completely bonkers, but that's in a good way. But his channel, each of his little YouTube videos always brings a smile to the face, and he does various things like competitions with other athletes. He did a diving competition with Tom Daley, who is a Great British diving bronze medalist from the Rio and London 2012 games. And he did a powerlifting video with a British powerlifting champion who didn't win a medal but participated at the last Olympics in Rio as well. And it's interesting how all of these very fit athletes, because their particular sports demand particular skills, they are flexible and physically strong, but in very different ways. And actually, when you see them side by side, although they all have very well developed physiques, they're very different physiques. The weight powerlifter, for example, has very strong thighs, whereas the gymnast, because it's all upper body strength, have as little weight as they can get away with on their legs. So they have almost, in comparison when they're standing next to other athletes, almost pigeon legs. They're so skinny. So it's really interesting anyway, as well as great fun to watch people performing gymnastics, which is always like Cirque du Soleil has shown, is always an enjoyable thing to watch people doing. It's to marvel at the skill and the ability of these athletes anyway. But it is interesting that their skill sets do vary quite considerably, even though they are, as I say, all very in shape kind of people. So it's well worth following him and watching some of his videos. But I watched one he recently, I say recently, in the last 6 months, achieved 100,000 YouTube followers. And YouTube have a set of rewards that they give to those channels which have a lot of subscribers. And if you get 100,000 subscribers, you receive a YouTube play button in silver in a plaque that you put on the wall. If you get 1 million subscribers, you get a gold play button. And if you get 10 million subscribers, you get a diamond button, which is actually a silver button, but with a large crystal play symbol in the middle. And one YouTuber has achieved 50 million followers, and YouTube made what they call their Ruby reward, which was a ruby crystal in the shape of the channel's icon. So I sat there thinking, I'll obviously never get anywhere near 100,000. Even the most popular knitting and crochet channels will struggle to get to 100,000 followers, because we're quite a niche interest, and it's just not ever going to be that kind of mass appeal that certain other activities maybe will be. So I thought I'd quite like to have my own little YouTube award for uploading videos every week, and I thought I'll make a pillow. And so here it is. This is my YouTube play button cushion. It's done in double crochet, UK term, single crochet US, and with some colour work done. It's not quite perfect. I've only just stuffed it, so I've got to stretch it and mould it to the right shape so that I get the arrow of the play button going straight ahead rather than slightly down as it is at the moment. But I think I really, really like this cushion. I think it's very, very nice, and I just finished it today, having started designing it just 2 days ago. I used Signet Yarn Limited Grousemore DK. This is, I used their white and their poppy. Now this is a 75-25 mix. It's 75% acrylic, 25% wool. I wanted to get something this red. It needed to be a strong, bright red, like YouTube's own icon is. And I looked at the wool, the higher wool content yarns, and they had lots of reds, but none of them were the, if you like, the primary scarlet bright red that YouTube is. I don't know why that is. They were all very nice shades of red, but they were much more along the crimson to burgundy kind of end of the spectrum. So they were much darker red. Whether a bright red like this is considered to be not sophisticated enough for the more expensive yarn and the purposes, and it may well be. I mean, I was doing something as basic as a cushion. I could have made this in acrylic. There is Stylecraft do a bright red acrylic, but I wanted to make it a little bit more special. I wanted it to be a little bit more comfortable, so I wanted some wool content. So I got this Grousemore DK 25% wool mix. I used, in fact, 2 strands. So although this is a DK, I effectively used it as an Aran weight. I did look in the Aran weights, and there was no bright red, no other bright red yarn that would have suited the purpose. In the shop, in Mason's where I was, there may well be bright red yarns available online or at other shops, but at Mason's, which is my local yarn shop, and I prefer wherever I can to use my local yarn shop, the only real reds were the acrylic yarns, DKs. So that was why I got this, and I basically used the inside and the outside tails, thread through a button to avoid them getting knotted up together, and I used about 1 3/4 balls. I will be weighing the remaining amount of both. I only used a small amount of the white, but I got the same. I bought this as Grousemore as well because I wanted to be able to wash this. It's a 10 by 16 inch pillow form. And why 10 by 16? The golden ratio is considered by mathematicians and architects to be the most pleasing ratio of the sides, the long side to the short side of a rectangle. This isn't quite 10 by 16, but it's in that kind of vicinity. And for most people, this is considered to be the most pleasing ratio. And the A series of paper in the UK and Europe, so A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, all has this ratio of long side to short side of about 1.618, which is the golden ratio. And 1.6, a ratio of 1.6 means that if you've got a pillow that is 10 inches deep, then you need it to be 16 inches long, effectively, because it's 1.6 times longer than the 10, so that's 16. Another way of calculating, just for those who are interested, a way of calculating the golden ratio is to take successive terms in the Fibonacci series. Now, the Fibonacci series is a very famous series discovered by the Italian mathematician Fibonacci, as the name suggests, and it's found by adding the 2 numbers in a series and generating the next number, and then adding that to the previous number to generate the next number, and adding that to the previous number to generate the next number. And you start with 1, so you have 1, 1, 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 2, 3 is 8, 8 plus 5 is 13, 13 plus 8 is 21, and so on. And if you take 21 and divide it by the number that precedes it, 13, you get approximately 1.61. If you take 13.4 and divide it by 21, which are the next 2 numbers in the sequence, again you get about 1.61. These are all things you can do for yourself. And it approximates to the golden ratio. And the significance about the A series of paper is that an A1 sheet, if you cut it halfway across the length, so you have it long side, if you have it portrait side, if you cut it halfway across and turn the 2 halves sideways, these are now A2, and the ratio of the new long side to the short side is also 1.6. And if you cut the A2 halfway across it lengthways and take one of the sheets and turn it sideways, the new long side to the short side is still the 1.6, and it carries on all the way through. So A1 is the main sheet, A2 means there are 2 A1s, A3 is that there are two A2s, two of them in A2. A4 means there's two of those in A3. A5 is two of those in A4, and so on and so on and so on. And by cutting in half lengthways, you maintain the golden ratio. In the US and Canada, I think the size of paper is 8.5 by 11 inches, but it's closer to 8.1 by 11.1 to get the golden ratio, which is what an A4 letter size is. So just why I chose to do a 10 by 16. So in fact, I could only get a 10 by 10 pillow form, and I have used polyfill, the toy stuffing, to fill out the rest of the pillow. And so it needs a little bit of pressing into shape, and it will gradually move into shape. But that will now sit behind me, and that's my YouTube pillow. I will be, as I say, I will be putting the pattern onto Ravelry in the near future. I've been making notes as I've gone along, and I will write it up and make it more attractive as a pattern. But there we are. That was something I wanted to share. I do have a new work in progress since last week, and that is, you may remember I talked about this, the mermaid blanket for my 10-year-old niece, or soon-to-be 10-year-old niece, has used already one full ball of yarn. Actually, this is a skein of yarn. I was going to talk about this, but I'll talk about it next time. But this is the yarn that I'm using, which is the fondant colourway, which is a nice bright pink, girly pink, and that's the Stylecraft Special DK. It's 100% acrylic, and it's a very affordable and reasonably priced item. I'm just going to... I just need to go. Sorry, one of the cats is being a bit silly. I will just be a second. There we are, we're back. Sorry about that. Yes. Anyway, sorry, I've had so many problems with editing the videos. I'm loath to actually pause it and restart, so I thought it better just to leave it for a second. That's all sorted out. Now, the eagle-eyed among you will be... Sorry, I was actually talking about this first. So I've used a full ball of yarn already. I'm just starting the decrease, as you can see, to go in before coming back out and then doing the tail fins. So I should have the first half of that done very shortly. But that has been put on the back burner while I finished the video play button cushion, a YouTube play button cushion, because I wanted to get that done before this video this week. So I've got plenty of time to get that one done, and I'll probably finish that side off this evening anyway. So that's my work in progress, which I thought would be of interest to you. As I was about to say, the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that the bookcase is no longer here. I'm just going to pick up the camera to show. Instead, I have all my project bags and my works in progress down there, and these containers contain balls of wool that I'm using for a couple of projects. And I'll just scan around and you'll see, I can't see what you're looking at now, but I think I'm pointing you at my desk, where I've now put the bookcase above the table. Which makes it more accessible. I've got rid of a lot of old VHS cassettes that I no longer need and haven't watched in many a long year. because I do have a VHS player, as you probably saw when I spun the camera around. But most of the tapes I had over here, I've actually got in other formats, mostly Netflix and Amazon, so I don't need the physical cassette anymore. So I decided to unload that and make this a more pleasant area to sit in and better organise my table over there. So that's something I've done this last couple of days. So hopefully that will make sitting here watching the TV and crafting with my pussycats next to me, like Toby is right now, more enjoyable and feel less chaotic than it has done. So I think I'll move on to acquisitions then, as well as the owl glasses case that I got from Part Pixie. Claudia also mentioned the Karmic Kitty cushions, and these are perfectly adorable. So I've got to make some of these. I have bought the pattern and downloaded it, and I will make some as and when I have time between other projects, because they look like quite good fun. And again, I think I will use polyfill for these rather than try to buy a round cushion. Although it may be that some of the round cushion forms will fit anyway, and just use the polyfill for the ears. But they're such adorable creatures. I'm quite looking forward to getting going with those. And while still talking about patterns, I'm nearly done with my raglan sweater from Tincan Knits. I haven't really knit on it a huge amount this week because I've been doing the crocheting, which is my first love anyway. But I really like the Tincan Knits business model, where when they provide a pattern, the pattern ranges from 0 to 6 months all the way up to 4 times extra large. So you could actually make the same item for every member of the family, which I wouldn't necessarily want to do, but it's nice that it gives you the scope to be able to do that. And every pattern will fit you personally, because it's designed with details throughout for all the different sizes. So I have invested in a book of patterns by Tincan Knits, which is called Mad Colour. I don't have nearly enough colour in my life, and I want to have more. There are a number of different items in here for adults and for children, and blankets and scarves. I mean, I just think that is such an adorable top, for example, and wouldn't be that difficult to make. It looks like a fairly straightforward lace pattern. And as well as striping hats, there are also dotted hats. So there's a variety of different types of colour work, and I saw these on Grocery Girls, and I want to make those mittens, because I just think those mittens are fantastic. I think I'll probably make them fingerless, simply because I need to have my fingers free when I'm working out in the yard in the winter, but I don't necessarily want to get cold hands. And I love this top as well, so I think that's, again, a no-brainer. And it's interesting to see how different the jumper looks with a dark main colour on the adult and the bright main colour on the child. It looks like a completely different jumper, and it's exactly the same. So you can have very wildly varying effects just depending upon what you choose to use as your colours. So that's come all the way from Canada in the last couple of days, so I'm very pleased about that. Now, I have been off work, as I say, this week, and I've been out a couple of times with my friend Wendy, and today particularly with my friend Wendy and her husband Bob. And Wendy in particular, although Bob slightly, but Wendy in particular is a complete and utter enabler. So we went on Tuesday to a fabric shop, an independent fabric shop in Kidlington, which is a village, small town, 7 miles to the north of Oxford, so the equivalent of Abingdon, but in the north of the city rather than the south. Separate entity, but very much connected in the sense of being effectively a dormitory town for the city. Hello, Bunty. You come to say hello as well? There we go. Yes, who's a good girl? You are. And there were lots of fabrics. It's interesting going from my experience of masons in Abingdon to I can't remember the name of this. I can't remember the name of the shop in Kidlington. In masons in Abingdon, it's a fantastic experience going in, but you are assaulted on all sides by so much stuff, just piled high in every direction. It can actually make it quite overwhelming and difficult to see what it is that you want to buy. The shop in Kidlington has probably got about the same level of stock, in all honesty, but has a much bigger floor space, and so has it laid out much more easily for you to see the different types, and has it laid out in better the curtain fabrics are here and heavier fabrics are there and cotton fabrics are here and so on, which Masons does have to an extent, but to a lesser extent, and it just feels less overwhelming as you walk in. And there were lots of lovely fabrics in there, but I ended up buying some fat quarters because I don't need a lot of fabric and I've got space for fat quarters, so I got these lovely striped, coloured stripes, almost like beach huts or deck chairs at the seaside, and in lots of different colours. So I've got 7 striped fabrics in the different colours. There was this lovely sewing related fabric which has a tailor's dummy and various different types of scissors and so on and so forth. This lovely different hens and cockerels, which is just, I love the background colour on here as much. I think the background colour really helps the hens to become characters in this fabric. It's a really attractive colour. It's kind of brown or beige, but a deeper than just beige. And again, another sewing fabric, slightly different from the previous one. In the background colour is different. This philately fabric, which is stamps from various parts of the world, and then a tape measure fabric, which I just think is lovely. I think that's actually really quite attractive, and I think this will make quite a nice notions pouch, not potions nouch. I'm always doing that. Reverend Spooner lives. So I think that's really very pretty. So I bought those in Kidlington. I was very pleased with that. I didn't need, but I quite like the idea of having some. I've got space in my stash for some fat quarters, and they're small enough that I can actually see things that I would do with them. But today we went to Burford, which is a small market town between Oxford and Cheltenham on the A40 in the Cotswolds. It's a beautiful English market town, but all the buildings appear to be built with Cotswold stone, so there's creamy golden yellowy stone, very beautiful. Really lovely. Once you're off the main road, really lovely environment, and a lovely church as well, the Church of St John the Baptist, which has a very interesting architectural history in its own right. It's a higgledy-piggledy kind of church. It's got various building phases all the way through from the 11th century through to the modern day. But we went in a couple of shops. So Just Fabrics is the name of the shop in Burford. And I saw some wonderful fabrics, but they had some remnants. And I saw this, and it's such a beautiful design. really bright, vibrant colours, almost geometric, idealised graphic design of plants, trees, effectively. So there's about 2.5 metres by 1.5 metres. So there's plenty of fabric there, and I could make something really interesting with this. So I've got a few ideas, and I think I might make some cushions with this. I've got a couple of very big cushions, and I think that kind of bold graphic design is going to work really well on them, and really brighten up the place. And because of the different strong colours, the orange, the yellow, the red, the blue on the plants, it will actually go with most of my furnishings and so on. So it's not going to clash, it's actually going to accentuate. The other thing I bought, we went then to the Burford Garden Company, just on the outskirts of Burford, which is a garden centre by any other name. Quite a posh place, really. The items that they had on sale there were not cheap. They were some of them really fantastic designs, but really quite expensive designs as well. But I really enjoyed going around. And while we were there, I saw some hand lotions. And there's this rather nicely packaged one, which I now can't get into because I've not got my scissors with me. I think, no I do, I have my scissors with me. The string holding it together is knotted, so I need to cut the string. It's a rather attractive box, very nicely packaged. So you need to take off the string, and then we open the box somehow. There we go, there we are. And inside the box, again nicely packaged, is a tube of hand cream. There we are. And we open the hand cream and pierce and put a small drop of the hand cream on. You don't need a demonstration how to use hand cream. But this hand cream is scented. And crocheting, because the fibres can actually dry out your hands as they're working through. And by using a scented hand cream, it actually imparts its scent onto the yarn that you're using. I wish you were here to smell this. This is, I don't think it says it on the packet. Oh, it does. This is pink grapefruit. I think it's slightly out of focus there. I don't know if you're able to see that, but this is called pink grapefruit. And it smells just like pink grapefruit. And so the really pleasing thing is that I went into the supermarket and managed to find some pink grapefruit juice, because having smelt the pink grapefruit, all I wanted to do was have a drink of pink grapefruit juice. So, excuse me. That's delicious. So this is beautiful hand cream. It isn't cheap, it's £12 for this tube. But it's really, really nice. Really nicely made. It contains vitamin E as well, so it's good for the hands. So we went into Burford Town Centre and into one of the charity shops. And in the charity shop, I saw this, which is a picnic hamper. And it contains within, if I can just open up the, there we are, it contains within the items. The cup's fallen out, so that just pops in there. Somehow. Well, it will. And knives and forks as well. And that's a nice thing in itself, but actually I won't be needing it during the winter as a picnic hamper. And it will make quite a nice tote storage for a project I'm working on. It's a little bit of wear and tear around the edges, but nothing structurally important. £5. that cost me, and I thought that was a snip, so I bought that, and it's a really nice little basket that stands up by itself or lays flat, so it can be used either way. And my final purchased acquisition this week is a project bag. Now, all of my other project bags I've made myself, but I was watching the WTF knitting podcast, and yes, that really is the name of the podcast. It's and by he is a nurse, and I think, is it Pennsylvania? I can't remember where he's based, but he's a nurse, and yes, his podcast really is called WTF Knitting Podcast, and he's very funny. He is constantly laughing, even though he's the only person in the room. It's rather silly. I was put onto it by Jodie from the Grocery Girls. She recommended it in one of her, not the most recent podcast, but the one before that, I think it was. And he recommended a bag maker in the UK for various reasons, not only because the bags were of very good quality, but were relatively very cheap, and as a USP, if you like, this particular bag seller donates her profits to charity, which is a very fine thing for somebody to do. And the company name is QBS, or QBs, not for profit. And this is her tag, which, so you can see it's QBs rather than QBS, not for profit, on Etsy. And this is the bag. And as a child, we had, I say as a child, I was about 12, 13, we had a golden cocker spaniel called Lady, who unfortunately became ill and died just before my own father became ill and died. And she was a delightful golden cocker. And I saw this hand embroidered or machine embroidered face, and I thought, I have to have that bag. It is a beautifully made bag. This top stitching decoration is lovely. The zip is perfect. It's got the same detail on the inside. I love the linen feel of the bag. I don't think it's interfaced. I can see right through it, so I don't think it is. But it's stiff enough to stand up. It's flat bottomed. It's stiff enough to stand up when it's got things inside it. And inside, there was a lovely message. And two beautiful stitch markers. One is the ribbon. The symbol for breast cancer research in the UK is the pink ribbon, which we usually have in October, and that's a 4-leaf clover for good luck. And I was informed that £5 had been donated from the proceeds for this bag, and that means that she has so far donated just shy of £1,000 to primarily Cancer Research UK, is her current charity. But it was such a nice little note that she left on there, and it's such a beautiful bag. I've used it already. This is what I put the yarn for. This and I have to say, this fit a ball of yarn, a cake of yarn, and most of the pillow form, the pillow cover rather, whilst I was making it. So it was a tight fit, but it's a good size bag, so it could easily hold a pair of socks, for example, without any difficulty. It's a lovely bag, and I'm looking forward to putting one of my other projects into it rather soon. So, the other thing I have made some progress on at the beginning of the week, but it's rather dried up towards the end of the week because I've been doing other things, is my... they're called Crocodile Scales. In honour of Game of Thrones, I'd rather think of them as dragon scales. So I've done two full colours. Sorry, two full colours, most of a full colour because it started partway through this colour, and about half of the next colour. So I'm about halfway through this side of the scarf, and I think it's looking absolutely beautiful. And when it's when it's going to be finished, it's going to be a beautiful scarf. And I'm really enjoying the process of making this. It's a very simple process of creating this kind of lattice framework at the top, which is 2 double crochets in US terms, 2 double crochets, 2 chains, 2 double crochets, 2 chains all the way across. And then you do 5 double crochets into one of the posts, a chain 1 and 5 into the other post, bring you, so 5 take you down and 5 bring you back up, and that's what creates the scale effect. And as you can see, we alternate lines of 4 scales and 3 scales, so there's always complete scales, but they overlap each other. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful scarf, and I'm really looking forward to finishing that. So that's another work in progress that I should have mentioned. I had done some work on. One other acquisition this week was actually from a friend who has given lots of her patterns to me, and there are lots of lovely patterns in there, but there are 4 booklets that spring to attention. So one is a book of 10 sock patterns for women, for children, for men, various patterns and designs, including charts for fish, so that you can make these lovely fish socks. And again, the charts are for 3 different stitch counts, depending upon the size of sock that you're making. So that's very nice. There's a lovely checkerboard effect sock. The only criticism of this leaflet is that it rather presumes that you're making socks for women on the main, and there's no reason why, for example, the checkerboard socks, the striped socks, the spiral socks, there's no reason why those couldn't be made for men. But unfortunately, the only socks that have men's sizes catered for are the fishing socks, which is a lovely pattern, mimicking fish scales going up. It's not impossible, it just means that there's a certain amount of maths has to be done to make the socks work for a larger stitch count for a man. But the other 3 items are for... I've made lots of little amigurumis over the last year. I say lots, I mean 4 or 5 different types of amigurumi over the last year. But they're all crocheted. There are 3 knitting booklets here. One called Gnomes at Home, so it makes this lovely gingerbread house, and Mr. and Mrs. Gnome and their little tree, which is a very Christmassy scene. So that's one thing that I'm quite... I'd like to try my hand at. The second is this Noah's Ark, which I'd like to do some, if not all, of the animals on this, because they're just so adorable. And in fact, I dare say that Mr. and Mrs. Noah could really be the 2 Mr. and Mrs. Gnome adapted, if you don't want to. But these, I mean, these are just seem very small, but I suppose to keep them in scale, it may be that you have to do that. And then there's this Advent tree. And the idea here is that all of these decorations, the penguin, the bells, the Father Christmas, and so on and so forth, the little drum, the trumpet, all of these are made... And it's actually got, so you put them in a box like this, and on each of these days you take out the corresponding decoration and put it on your tree. So you start with the star, then a pear, then the penguin, and it's got all the patterns for these. And I think I would really, and there you can see the intended, what it's meant to look like. So you just make a box up, and I'd really like to try at least some of these decorations, because I just think they're lovely to look at. So those are the 4 kind of main things that I'm looking at. The trouble is, when do we have the time? Time is just ebbing away. The one thing I regret this year, with all of my enjoyment of fibre arts, and I haven't even begun the spinning yet. I've got the crafty class that I'm going to watch, but this week I was going to learn how to spin, I haven't started that yet, but I really want to, and everything is up there ready to go, so it's easily at hand. I just need to watch the video and then get going with it, because the sooner I start getting going with it, the sooner I'm going to get better at doing it, is my philosophy. Just pop the label back in the ball of yarn so I know what the yarn is. But my only regret from this last 12 months is that I didn't start doing all this stuff 30 years ago when my mother first showed me how to knit, 35 years ago, when she first showed me how to knit. I'm sad only because that's 35 years when I could have been doing so much stuff that I don't have time to do. I'm trying to do everything I want to do so many different things. It's such an enjoyable pastime. I get so much enjoyment from just playing around with ideas, from learning new techniques, from making things that people like to see, from making things as gifts for people and knowing how much they appreciate them. I just get so much pleasure from this that the only thing I regret about it is that I came to it so late. However, having said that, I'm late to the party. I aim to make up lost time, so I spend as much time as I can doing all these things and enjoying the process, and I hope that some of that enjoyment comes across to you as I share what I'm about with you. So that is it for this week. There are other things I want to talk about, but I think an hour of your time is more than sufficient for you to need a break. Thank you for spending some time with me. I'm sorry, I know the camera is at this end of the phone, but my image is at that end of the phone, so I keep looking over, which on that is actually the other way around, but don't worry about that. It is, the way I'm pointing is still the same direction, but it's just very confusing. As I'm looking at the camera here, I'm seeing myself over there, so my eyes are constantly going over. So I do try to look at the camera whenever I can. So thank you for spending some time with me, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. So stay happy, stay healthy, and stay safe. Bye.